Welcome back to Racing Rundown here on YouTube. I'm Eric DeCoster, and welcome back to another 2023 Kentucky Derby profile as we take a look at Wood Memorial winner Lord Miles. A horse that we have to talk about, but a horse who, and we try to stay as objective as possible in these profiles, but it's really hard to see a path forward where Lord Miles can be a huge Kentucky Derby contender despite coming off wood. But we'll give him his due. Of course, we're going to point out the cons, the pros, and everything that he brings to the table leading into this Kentucky Derby. Trained by Saffie Joseph Jr., who's had a Derby runner in the last few editions now. He had New York Traffic run back in 2020, the COVID Derby, but he would have been in the regular Derby regardless. And White Barrio last year was coming in a big streak. He had a rough trip, wasn't able to work things out. Nevertheless, comes back. And one thing he said that I think we should often keep in mind when we think about Lord Miles leading into this Kentucky Derby and just in general as we go through this preview is he said, well, we know we'll be a long shot, but I've won with long shots in races before that I didn't think could win as well. So something along those lines is what he said. So that's just something we need to keep in mind with Lord Miles. But let's start with the pros. Let's get the big things out of the way, and we'll start with the fact that he improved in the Wood Memorial big time. I think there's very little to deny that. He had lagged in Florida in a few Derby preps, ran in the Mucho Macho Man, which was a good effort. I think you kind of just we'll go through the career quick. Broke his mate nicely, sprinting at Gulfstream, ran a big third in the Mucho Macho Man Stakes, going a one-turn mile, clearly in need of more ground, and then two dull efforts in the Holy Bowl and the Tampa Bay Derby, and then won the Wood Memorial at 59-1. Which was a very surprising win, but we'll dive into that Wood Memorial in a lot of ways in a few minutes. But either way, it was big improvement because he was sixth in the Holy Bowl, fifth in the Tampa Bay Derby, was coming off a loss in a listed stakes before all that, and then you win a Grade 2 100-point Derby prep in the lead into that, and he jumped forward from a career high 79 buyer, which when non-winners of two, let alone a Kentucky Derby, all the way up to a 93. Winning the Wood Memorial. So a really strong performance that day. And I think one thing to note is that he was ridden a little bit more aggressively rather than sit mid-pack and take himself out of contention early on. He sat close up to the lead and stuck around and then made the kick. But if you look at the Holy Bowl and the Tampa Bay Derby, he was further back and he wasn't really able to make a big run. One thing I've noticed about him is he is kind of lazy. And that's kind of leads into that second pro, which is that he's gotten better in two starts and taking the blinkers off. In the Holy Bowl, they added blinkers. That was career start number 3. And that was definitely because in the Mucho Macho Man, he was not very engaged throughout the running. You could tell his rider that day, Edgar Zayas, Irad Ortiz rode him in the Holy Bowl. Edgar Zayas was really pushing him for more throughout that race, and he came along late, but it was pretty lackadaisical, all things considered. Well, they added the blinkers in the Holy Bowl, and it made him rank, but not in the sense that he showed a ton of speed. He did not love the blinkers. I could tell watching those replays back, but nevertheless, it didn't give him any more punch late in the game because he's really just not a fast horse early on. So he had the blinkers, but it didn't sharpen him up at all. It made him run the same, except expend a little bit more energy early fighting the rider because he has the blinkers on. Well, Tampa, they take him off, and he shows that same laziness, but he did pick off horses late. So once again, kind of sticking with that, he's a pretty lazy horse early on in the running. Well, the Wood Memorial, Paco Lopez did a great job keeping him engaged early on in the event, and then kicking home when it mattered. But I will say, if you watch again that replay, at about the half-mile pole, he does start to drop back, and Paco then has to really get after his mount, and he even gets passed on the outside by Hitcho, but then he re-engages nicely and finishes up well. Which leads into our next point, which is that the pedigree does suggest the further the better, and that really showed. I felt like a little bit in the Tampa Bay Derby when you watched the replay back because he was passing horses late, but the Wood Memorial, absolutely, because the mile and an eighth, the longer the race got, the more time he had to grind out a win, because he does not have a huge turn of foot, but he can wear some horses down if given the chance to. So naturally, adding an extra furlong, getting out to a mile and a quarter, is going to benefit him a lot. And the pedigree backs that up, being by Curlin. The dam side, maybe not so much, but he's a big lanky horse. Being by Curlin alone, that's going to put a lot of stamina into you. So I think that he will definitely appreciate the Derby distance, and I think Here's something I will say. I don't think he's going to be dropping back late in this race because that's not something he's ever done. He has a great tendency to, he's either going to be stationary or he's going to be passing horses late, which, there's bound to be some tired horses. I don't know how many there will be in this year's Derby because the pace scenario seems kind of, slow to mild at this point in the game. But regardless, this is not a horse that will be dropping back in the stretch, in my opinion. I think he'll either be staying in the same place or he'll be gradually gaining late. So there is a big positive that I've almost come up with off the top of my head that I don't think he's going to be in the mood to be backing up late in this stage, and that leans into the pedigree, that leans into the grinded out and the improvement he showed in the Wood Memorial. Now for the cons, the Wood Memorial. I mean, you beat Hit Show, who won the Withers and will be in this Kentucky Derby, but is far from considered a top contender leading into this race. And outside of that, it was a lot of horses who maybe had potential, but a lot of them did not live up to it, whether that was because of distance or some horses got some brutal trips in behind. If you watch the Wood Memorial back, I think really post like 3 to the outside, if you didn't clear off like Arctic Arrogance and Lord Miles did, it pinched out those other runners pretty badly. Like Slip Mahoney and General Banker were the two that probably got the worst of it. So, point being, weak competition. Some of them had trouble. He got the close to a perfect trip and beating Hit Show. And then the third place finisher was Dreamlike, who's a nice horse for Todd Pletcher, but he's an 8. He never won a race before, and he was a head and a nose away from being a Kentucky Derby contender. So that's not a positive in his corner. And even then, we talked about the improvement. Well, it was still the weakest buyer from any of the 100-point prep race winners. So when I say 100 points, I mean the winner getting 100-point preps, 200 in total awarded to the competitors in that race. And I mean that's still that's not a good look when even your best race is slower than the other top horses in the field. That's not a recipe for success, in my opinion, for Lord Miles. And also, he doesn't have any trip excuses from the losses in the Holy Bowl. I mentioned the blinkers being on, but regardless, he was still the same horse, and he still had every chance to win that race. Tampa Bay Derby probably more so. It's not like he was, beating himself up. It's not like that he was finding trouble in any sort of way. He was just running his race, and like I said a bunch earlier, taking himself out of contention at times by turning himself off mentally, it seemed. Once again, he was ridden kind of forwardly in the Wood Memorial, but when you go back to it, there was not a lot of pace in that race. I drew it up personally, thinking Arctic Arrogance can almost take it all the way because there was no other speed in the race, and that allowed Lord Miles to sit as forward as he did. So I don't even think in the Kentucky Derby he'll be in that top flight. I don't think he's fast enough to be in that top flight in general. I think he'll probably be sitting at least 10th to 15th in those opening stages. I think there's still, even with the lack of pace, still not enough for him to be as close as he was last time out. So for that reason, I think that this is a horse that would really be a surprise if he was able to win the Kentucky Derby. Now, he'll be sticking around, and should they melt things down on the front end, which would be a bit of a surprise, I think, for most people handicapping this race, I think that's the only way I could see him really gaining late to an effect, or at least he hits the board. I don't think he'll be backing up, but I don't know if he has the turn of foot to win this race, and he's definitely not one of the best off-the-pace types that'll show up here if that hypothetical scenario were to take place. So he's weak in a lot of ways. He's shown a few improvements, and he's definitely going to like the distance, but I don't think that'll be enough to move him forward. But maybe for you, something I said gleaned a positive enough where you will include him on your tickets. That's certainly our goal here at the end of the day. So with that, that's all I have on this Kentucky Derby contender profile. We'll see you next time here on Racing Rundown.